Hey guys, so I wanted to say hi. Number one, I am walking during my lunch at work, but I wanted to continue a little bit more about what I endured as a Jehovah's Witness. As a Jehovah's Witness child, there was always a lesson to be learned. I mostly had the really hot temper, which is fine. My dad always called me his little Peter, if that gives you any idea of my personality. So I guess the biggest thing that I wanted to say was there was always a lesson to be learned. So many instances of abuse. I have scars down my back from the ant killer belt, where he chose to whip the crap out of me one time, and he just started flinging it, and the belt buckle would snap, of course, and unfortunately one of the times was right over the top of my spine, and luckily enough it didn't cut through to my spine, but it very well could have broken my back. Luckily enough it didn't. I do still have a scar. Have a scar from where it hit. So I can always reach back and remind myself. There was one time he pushed me out onto the road, and I actually have a scar on my forehead, right there, where I fell out onto the street. I have a scar in the back of my head where I was pushed into a pool. My dad had decided that I was breathing too loud. I don't know what was up with that. So he pushed me into a pool. But the pool cut the back of my head open. Had stitches there as well. Mom tried to cover it up with a butterfly tape, but it wouldn't stick, of course, because it was in my hair at that point. There was another time she thought it was really funny, my mom did, that I was so determined that I was going to leave that I tried to walk through a closed door. I was probably pretty much in a frenzy trying to leave, trying to escape. Walked into the door handle and it blacked my eye, so I had a black eye because of it. There was another time where my dad said that I had a hot temper, so he put the tea kettle onto the stove. It was in the middle. He was trying to teach me that my anger, even though wasn't directed at somebody, would still cause damage. So he turned the element on high, and it was the tea kettle in the middle of the 4 different burners, and only one of the burners was on. And he left the handle of that teapot over the top of that red hot element. Now the water in the tea kettle was boiling, so you have to know that it was really hot for it not to even be on the element, and it was boiling. He told me to pick it up, and of course, I hemmed and hawed and giffed and googled around. I'm like, no man, I don't want to do this. I knew it was hot. I knew it was going to hurt. And eventually he made me grab it. Of course, it burned my hand. It was the whole palm of my right hand. It burned my hand, and of course I immediately dropped it and was like, screaming. And when I dropped it, though, the tea kettle splashed back, and I burned on the inside of my fingers, in between my fingers as well. So the lesson there was that even though I may not be directing my temper or my heat or my anger towards one person, that many people will get burned regardless of my intent. I had blisters on the palm of my hands and in between my fingers for a very long time. It seemed to be worse, the abuse, during summer, when, of course, it wouldn't go to school to be reported. And even then, it was always stories on she tripped, she is clumsy, she did this, she did that. It was always somehow my fault. It was never a punishment that they had, even though they had done it, it was never a punishment that had resulted in an injury. It was always something that I did, something sort of clumsy on my part. So that was very typical of what my dad did to me. Of course, the spankings with the ant killer belt, he would laugh and say that he broke spoons over my butt. It was just a very extremely violent household. So that was a little bit about my dad and kind of the experiences that I had growing up with him. He is still an elder in the congregation. My brother is still in the congregation, has been worshiping, has never spent a day out of the religion. Neither has my dad. They have never been counseled. They've never been criticized. They never have been any form of disciplined. Nothing. There has been nothing done, even though the elders knew about it. I did tell the elders about 5 years ago everything that happened growing up, and like I said, nothing ever happened. Nothing has ever happened to them. But of course, there's very much, when I go back, there's a ton of trauma. A lot of anxiety, panic attacks, all that good stuff. So that's kind of what my dad was like. So I guess going back a little bit too, I started raising my brother when I was 7. And I will kind of get into this a little bit. I will stop it as close as I can to the 10-minute mark. That's my promise to you and to myself. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on. So I raised my brother since I was 7. My mom had postpartum depression pretty bad. At least that's what I figure is. And so I was always raising him, the whole cloth diapers, feeding, burping, teaching how to walk, buckling into the car seat, just the whole shebang was all my responsibility at 7. My brother was a very colicky baby, so there was a lot of issues, a lot of problems with him. There was always something going on. So I raised him. He was my little pal. I did everything for him. I miss him horribly. At least the little brother I raised. So I was about, I was probably about 16 or so, I think, when the news of my brother's molestation kind of hit the elders finally. A 3-year-old had gone to the elders to describe moments of sexual assault that she had endured. When she reported it to them, the elders had labored her at that point. Joshua did admit at that time that he was touching her, but said that it was only in the purpose of changing her diaper. Unfortunately, we both know that's not the case. I know it wasn't. One of the elders, Ron Gerlach, who is actually still an elder, labeled Joshua as a curious kid. Now, as far as I am concerned, a 17-year-old should not be touching a 3-year-old in that manner at all, and I don't care if it's curiosity. I would break off all of his fingers and shove them up his nose in a heartbeat. But he was labeled as a curious kid, and so nothing was ever done with that situation, although they did ask us to move halls. They moved us from Sandy East to Sandy West, and that we were there for roughly about 6 months or so, and another little girl came forward. I'm not going to name any of the victims, but she came forward and stated that she had been sexually assaulted during that time as well. So they looked at different congregation possibilities, and Estacada came up. Now, Estacada did not have any young children, and so they intentionally moved him out to Estacada, so that he would not, so that he wouldn't have the children around him. And at both Sandy East and Sandy West and Estacada, they had a judicial committee meet with him each and every time. Now, he was truly, truly repentant, and so they didn't discipline him. They refused to give a talk about the sexual assaults or appropriate touching or anything like that. They absolutely flat out refused. They didn't send any letters on with Joshua, but although he did meet with elders on several occasions at all three halls, so they all knew, every one of them knew that Joshua was a sexual offender at this point. None of the elders asked any questions of us other girls, and I always carried that guilt around with me up until about 6 months ago, that I never could protect the other victims, that nobody listened to me, nobody really had that input to save those little kids, because if they would have listened, they would have heard me, they would have been able to stop him from abusing. So that's where I'm going to kind of leave it for right now. I did carry that guilt around. I have resolved it. I'm still working through some of it, but that's kind of where I'm going to leave it for right now, because that's the 10-minute mark, and I really want to honor and respect my choices and your time. And thank you for listening again. And I will post more as I can. Well, thank you. Bye.